Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham and such. Alright, so a couple of interesting things happened. I mean, I did make the Stefan Molyneux response videos, and then I had the conversation with Annika O'Brien, and the comments weren't too good. Look, I didn't think it was going to be some sort of, you know, um, brilliant conversation. The whole point of it, as I even said to her, um, was that, yeah, I fundamentally disagree with a lot of people, and I just kind of want to get to the core of those disagreements, because I kind of think they're about things, the subjects are never about the subject. There's always some other subject. No matter what the political subject is, it's usually about some other agenda. Like, I've always pointed out how, the abortion subject has nothing to do with abortion. It just has to do with people who resent other people having comfortable sex, feeling good about having sex and all that kind of stuff. And they just want people to feel the same uncomfortable feelings they feel, or they just resent it, period. And they don't really care about the fetuses, or certainly they obviously don't care about the children. I mean, if the politics leaks out on these subjects, you can see the obvious part of it. And then there's all these men who vote Republican, and clearly, if they had their will, if women didn't have the vote, we wouldn't have any Democratic presidents. They'd all be the Republicans. They'd all be the, every man for himself, greedy, selfish, what's in it for me mentality would rule the world. I mean, it's another reason to be a feminist, in my opinion, is to recognize that, although you may think women are less, whatever, capable of doing good reasoning or intelligent or whatever the argument's going to be, more distracted than men or some other kind of bullshit. The fact is that politically, on balance, they sort of get the answer right, in the sense that they can smell the lack of any kind of desire to live in a civilization that apparently most males are blighted by. But anyway, that's a whole side subject. I wasn't about politics. So anyway, so yeah, I didn't have, I'd hoped the conversation, I had made some notes. It was, like I said, in the conversation we had before the conversation went live, I sort of made the point that, yeah, I don't really agree with anything, she says, and anything she believes in, and part of that is because her beliefs, I think, are just so traditional in some sense, or they're too cliche, too simplistic. And although she pretends, in my opinion, and it is pretending, she pretends to be a moderate, or she pretends to be even-handed. It's just pretending, and underlying that is maybe some racism, maybe some other kinds of philosophy. And I'd say it sort of leaks out, in the sense that in the conversation she did seem to keep changing the subjects, and that was kind of annoying. And even though I kept saying it, don't read comments, she just kept doing it. And she was doing it in the sense of reading comments about shit I couldn't possibly care less about, and really had no interest in wasting too much time on. So anyway, but this is what you have to do. I mean, that's what I'm thinking, right? Is that I have to change the approach of this channel, where I have to try to become more relevant. And to be more relevant, you're going to have these more civil and strangled conversations, attempting to actually get to the real subject without And again, to Annika's credit, as I told her, I think she has the guts, so to speak, to be able to participate in an examination of a person's values and their lifestyle and their their impact in the world, their blood footprint, and deal with those subjects and you know, attempt to defend their hypocrisy and duplicity, which I think I exposed some of hers. You know, even though the conversation didn't get deep on any of the subjects, whether it was the environment or even the subject of antinatalism, or the subject of greed in general, and whether it is good for civilization to have a bunch of people who just keep saying what's in it for me, whether you can even have a civilization based on a bunch of nepotism, you know, and a bunch of notions of some, like I said, I mean, you know, realistically, if people are going to be, if they're going to be, at least, you know, there's a certain practicality. If you're going to be a little bit racist, or even have some notion of retaining some sense of your racial identity, then you're really going to have to realistically understand that, yes, that's going to require some awful weird social legislation where you're going to have to start segregating people, because you're not going to be able to stop the inevitable dilution and mixing of the races. And so if you believe that, then you have to make rational arguments for some reason to maybe subdivide the United States into racial regions or something, because it's as a practical matter, I don't see what other alternative there is if you want to preserve race. You know, you know, without attempting to have some sort of population war, which I don't think anybody can win. Well, anyway, these are obviously all kinds of deep subjects, in a sense. You can get into a lot of psychology, and you know, that's sort of what I wanted to do, was attempt to make the difference, to show the difference between psychology and intelligence or knowledge or facts or evidence or persuasive arguments, reasoning. I guess that's a better word. So psychology versus reasoning as a platform for the discussion. I mean, how much of what people, their ambitions, their hopes, and you know, again, I had watched some of her videos with other people, and they had, you know, just completely silly conversations, in my opinion, about the real value, that the real thing that human beings should be cherishing is our ability to colonize space. Like, that's the, you know, and what is that based on? I mean, you know, and this whole idea too that when people talk about the human race, I don't believe these people for a minute think that most of the people on this planet they'd want living next door to them. I don't think they'd want to have them over for dinner. I don't think they have that much love for the human race beyond as just a word, you know, just a concept that they're among the team, and so they like the team because they're on the team, but they really don't like any of the other players. You know, they're just, it's just horseshit, you know, when they talk about these ambitions for the human race, when those ambitions are all in their head in some sort of, oh yeah, well, it'll be me, my husband, and my kids. That's the human race. You know, the human race isn't all those other assholes. No, it's my kids and my family and me, my sister's kids, and you know, it's just the people I like. That's the human race. The human race isn't all those other billions of people doing all kinds of wacky shit, believing all kinds of horse shit, living in all kinds of shit. That's not the real human race. The human race is just, you know, me and my friends. You know, my Facebook and Twitter people. That's the human race. So, so anyway, so just to the people who maybe thought the video was out of character, I'm just trying to be a bit out of character. You know, because I really, you know, this there's okay, there's you know, we had some plans where I'm going to maybe have interviews with some like-minded people, but I don't think the like-minded conversations go anywhere. Um, because often all they are is, and they just end up being arguments because I end up thinking that people believe something for the wrong reasons. So they're right, but for the wrong reasons. And this comes up in the vegetarian arguments too, you know, because the fanatic vegans are just so funny, you know, because I don't think they get the principle at all. The principle is to be opposed, to find it abhorrent and unacceptable, to torture animals, to serve trivial needs. That's the purpose of it, in my opinion. There's no other purpose. And so if I said something like, well, if brought roadkill to my house, I'd eat it. If somebody was going to throw some food out, I'd rather I ate it than it go to waste. I'd say the same thing about corpses. I don't see any. I wouldn't have any problem with Soylent Green. I wouldn't mind if Google ground up dead people into potato chips. It wouldn't bother me any. It'd be a perfectly satisfactory use of an inevitable circumstance that just ends up in waste in a lot of ways. So waste is the thing that should bother people, and so it's like these vegans seem to be vegan for the wrong reasons, and so many of the vegans don't seem to have any problem with the slaughter that takes place in nature every single millisecond. You know, every snap of my fingers, there's just so much horror taking place in the biosphere, and they aren't panicked at all about that circumstance, and yet they will go insane and ballistic if one aberrant crazy human does some crazy thing to an animal. It's a tragedy worth mourning forever. Yet the tragedies that happen right outside, right in the in the biosphere surrounding the place you're living, yeah, it doesn't matter somehow. Not important. So I'm not saying this about all vegans. I'm just saying that there's some people who just they turn everything as a religion. Everything is a religion. And people are just they do this. It's like the gun nuttery stuff. I mean, that's another subject I didn't get to with Annika, but she's some sort of gun nut, and you know, this whole it almost looks like Vogue-ness. There was a conference report had made a video. Didn't watch the whole thing. Didn't watch any of it actually. It's not much like conference report, but anyway, sort of on this general subject. Just the title intrigued me about how conservative is the new punk, and yeah, it just looks so much like that. It's just a it's whatever the emo wear black and I mean it's just a club, a way of being different. The new different, is to be an obnoxious, glib shit. To fully embrace your yuppie, couldn't give a shit attitude, bullshit, whatever. I'm not doing a very good job of trivializing it in the proper vernacular, but yeah, it just looks like some kind of fetish. Conservatives, the young conservatives, and the fetish is built around some notion of their that they've gone a step beyond, and yeah, all they've gone is beyond rationality, and that's sort of happening in the liberals too, though. So don't get me wrong. I think it's a problem everywhere. I think all ideologies, all philosophies are turning into ideologies, and people are just fanatics, and they're not really thoughtful and haven't thought about it at all. Because the Democrats have this huge problem of like the Bernie Sanders, for example. There's this whole wing of the Democratic Party that has essentially become Reagan-Borg things. Little, I don't know. Somehow they got brainwashed by Reaganomics, And so they still think Reagan was wrong, but they're somehow embracing this idea that you can just borrow money forever, and it's not a problem. It's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable for this generation to spend money all over the place, create a huge debt, and somehow that's not an issue for the future because no one will ever have to do anything about it. And obviously the interest payments are obvious and they're getting paid to the richest people in the world, the people you're trying not to make richer. And it's just so illogical. And you're saying, well, how could they fall for that? How could any like I said, it's just so pathetically stupid to have some notion that you can just keep borrowing money and paying real interest. I mean, interest, you'll never make money on savings. Savings are just going to become less and less practical. Being responsible will become less and less practical as you keep endorsing this insane policy of have it now and don't pay for anything in advance. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could go on and on about that subject, but I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, they never pay the principal, they pay interest forever, which means you essentially could pay $1 million for a hammer. These are real things they're endorsing, is paying, renting instead of buying. And it's never the right answer, I mean, as a practical matter. It's a theoretical matter. So as a matter of principle, it's never the right answer. I mean, it's only in some bizarre circumstance that it's the right answer. So in this case, the bizarre circumstance has to be that they believe that the United States of America going bankrupt wouldn't be a tragedy or a catastrophe in some way. That this wouldn't mean, depending on who's running the show, a complete disaster, mayhem, and death and harm and all kinds of things. So anyway, so the other subject came up was the global warming, and again, it's it was such a good illustration of the bullshit. People are against the idea that humans are creating most of the global warming, that our short-term consumption, our selfishness of the current generations are compromising the environment for the future in a significant way. And they think it's all some sort of conspiracy by crazy liberals to control them. I mean, they actually have these as theories, and they'll bring up something like the $1 billion we're going to give those European crooks, where we're actually we try to bribe other poor countries into doing just minor things, just things that are grotesquely, horribly polluting, like burning coal in open pits and stuff. And so maybe we can control a little bit of the pollution created in the world, and with that $1 billion. But they think that's just all some sort of government theft, and therefore the whole thing is crap because of this $1 billion. And yet they'll watch Trump give $1 trillion to the richest people in the world, and that doesn't bother them too much. They don't sweat over that. I mean, they don't deny the existence of something, to complain about that wasteful expenditure. So it's just really insane hypocrisy and duplicity and silliness. I guess part of it for global warming is that the solutions are all unpleasant. It will take money to fix the problem, creating sinks, to put carbon back into safe environments. It's going to take research money to find the right technologies to do that, and and it might not even be doable. And so that's another reason why they just say, "Oh, screw it," and we'll just pretend it's not going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem. Millions of people living. Well, there's actually literally billions of people living very close to the ocean. And when the ocean rises, it's going to be a big problem. You know, not only all the other problems that come with increase in temperature. So I think I made a very good argument, you know, just laid it out that this is we're reversing millions of years of geological evolution in a sense, and we're releasing, you know, carbon in sinks that have existed for millions of years, hundreds of millions of years of sunken carbon. And you know, the ancient world was warmer because those sinks didn't exist millions of years ago. And the fact that we're destroying those sinks is just such an obvious reason why change is in the future. It's going to happen. And unless we do something to fix it, you know, and it has to be fixed. Like the debt, somebody has to come up with a plan to do something about it. And if they don't, when interest rates do rise, when there is a bit of inflation, it's going to be catastrophic to the function of government, because the largest expenditure is going to be financing the existing debt. Just money right off the top that no one ever gets any productive value out of. It just goes to the richest people in the world. So these aren't exactly the subjects I wanted to touch upon. I just wanted to sort of get to the idea that I'm just thinking personally. As I've pointed out before, I mean, I didn't have to acquire this philosophy through argument with somebody. Somebody didn't argue me into it. I acquired it kind of independent of any tutelage. Anybody pointing out to me their misery or their suffering or you know, their exploitation, their fear about having to be reborn into a world that's going to be dissatisfactory. I mean, no one ever came to me with a similar perception. The one that occurred to me in my youth was like in the example of slavery, for example, is that these people who own these slaves, that it never occurred to them to think about the fact that, you know, when they're dead, life is going to continue to exist, and it's going to exist just like they got here. They're just going to arrive here as a feeling, sentient, and human. And if they create a circumstance where most of the sentient humans are living in shit, then they should have every expectation that they could, if they were standing in line, holding a number, to be the next lucky winner, that, yeah, those are the tickets they're going to win. They're going to be the, you know, Julio on the junk pile, you know, and he's going to spend his youth picking through other people's garbage. You know, and then all the other stuff that happens to people, the diseases and, you know, the birth defects, all kinds of stuff. Those are all tickets. It would be just like me waiting in line and getting those tickets. And so I understand that when I was born, okay, and I obviously got the much better ticket. And I've been spared so much harm. And yet, it occurred to me to say, but yeah, I can't really feel that, because even though I have been privileged, I found life very uncomfortable most of the time. And part of that is because of my own psychological problems, my own neuroses, acquired through a kind of a tormented childhood. And so, yeah, I just don't do life the way most people do it, where it's just kind of, you know, it's kind of simple, you know, you know, you don't worry, and you just walk through it and you feel kind of okay. You don't have an upset stomach or a headache every day. You're not feeling the angst about what kind of day it's going to be. You just wake up and do it. I mean, I lived part of my life that way, where I just woke up and said, time to go to work, time to go to school, time to do whatever I had to do, and I could do it. And then there was years where it just got harder and harder to do that, because I didn't feel good, and everything was so much harder when you don't feel good. It's just, it's like being seasick or something. If you could imagine being seasick or a little bit woozy all day, and you have to do that every day, feeling not so good. Life isn't a joyride. It's just not much fun, and over years, it wears on you, and it makes an impression, and you're fully aware of the fact that, I wouldn't do this over again. And when you have the understanding of the fact that you're saying, I wouldn't do this again, and you've been really lucky, that's when it starts to get frightening. And that's what torments me, is the fact that you can't just blow your brains out and escape this trap, because there's no direct reincarnation, but we're living each other's impositions. We're paying each other's penalties. There's just no way of getting around it. I mean, this idea of identity is interesting, but it doesn't mean much, because there's a pool of consciousness that's experiencing, and just doesn't, the individuals, their shape and color and names might change, but the circumstance isn't going to change. The pain and suffering isn't going to change. The bad luck isn't going to change. And just terrifies me how glib people are in sentencing consciousness to keep reliving very unsatisfactory, to put it mildly, existences, to endure much torture and suffering and pain, and they think they're worth it, and that's the bottom line. They think they're on such a wonderful cruise, that how can a little bit of inconvenience for the guys shoveling the coal, or the one or two you get killed here or there, or squished by some machine, or how can that be any kind of deterrent to just totally loving this little game? They don't see any of the blood, is what it comes down to. And that's a lot of people with nature. They have a fondness. They love the little animals, and they're so cute, and they're trying so hard, and blah 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 blah. They all have little stories, and but they're not really seeing the blood. They're not seeing the dead bodies, because most of them get consumed by the biosphere, and they don't just pile up somewhere so you get a good view of it. I mean, they do little thought experiments like that. What if all the flies on Earth died? Apparently it'd be like 2 inches thick across the whole Earth or something. A day's worth of flies is something like, if none of the flies got killed and they just bred for a week, it'd be like a foot thick, covering the Earth with flies. People just have no appreciation for what's happening on this planet, this living planet, Gaia, and that it is just, it's a meat grinder. And if I use that metaphor, I mean, it's a metaphor I would like people to deal with and explain exactly how it's not, how in total if you add up the friction, and then you take the function and put it in your hand, the wonderful thing we're accomplishing, I had a wonderful day. You take that and put it in your hand, and then you measure it against all of the noise and the screaming and the horror and the pain and the suffering. how you can say, good idea, yes, do some more of this, keep playing, keep putting new victims on the tightrope. So I use that analogy with Anna, and she just, Annika, and she did evade it. you know, um, um, because there's no excuse for it, but they will rationalize. So I don't want to. I don't know what part of this might be part of the conversation that she doesn't want me to talk about. So I don't want to make a mistake. But in a sense, there's a lot of rationalization. So you say something like, "Here's an argument pointing out how having kids is stupid," and then they'll point out how, well, it was my fault. The birth control failed, even though they had the second one also. So they're just rationalizations, so they can play both sides. They can say, oh well, yeah, I get your point, yeah, yeah, no, the world is a shitty place, and I don't know if I'd like to be born into this current existing world, because there's a lot of problems facing us, and it's pretty dire looking, and you don't inherit it, you're in big trouble. Your peace. Well, anyway. So the underlying point is, going all the way back to the point I was trying to make, is that I didn't have to be convinced, because I had enough life experience in terms of, again, I'm not saying I've suffered to some horrible extent as some people have, and I'm not saying there aren't people who have suffered greatly and they still seem to have some sort of positive mental attitude, that experiencing difficulty, persistent difficulty in finding some peace of mind, that yes, some people are so into the game, all right, that they'll take any pain just to play, because they're strongly addicted. Somebody who doesn't smoke cigarettes can't really understand cigarette smoking, So, but I would argue that those kinds of optimism biases are exactly that. They're biases in perspective based on an inordinate amount of incessant competitiveness, inability to accept when you've lost enough. It's like if they were at the casino, they would just keep playing because they just can't admit they're never going to get it back. And that's the road to ruin, so to speak, both in in all kinds of parts of our lives. The drinking too much, doing anything in excess, and there's so much of that excess in human psychology. And the life lover, addict, or whatever, it's probably I have to come up with some word for people who are drunk on it, and will never be reasonable, because they're just too drunk. They're too much of a lifeaholic to be able to acknowledge how it's ruining them and it's ruining the people around them, that it's causing all this unnecessary suffering just because they have some inability to recognize the truth that this few ounces of fluid, that this little bit of joy you get out of your life, isn't worth the price being paid for it. So, again, trying to get back to the point, which is I didn't have to be convinced. I didn't have to, I have no experience, let's put it that way, being argued into an understanding. It seems like a kind of innate evolution of intelligence, that you would come to the realization that the game is way too expensive. And so now we're back to an argument about the nature of intelligence. And some people are going to argue that our intelligence is our psychology, that what nature tells us, what are good and bad things. And there's even a comment in the comment sections, that's why I have it up there, it's because there was a guy who wrote an awful lot, so I thought I would just at least read some of it, because it's such a false premise that that there is something innate in nature, that we have the capacity to do this abstract thinking and modeling, and that it has been used for any other purpose than perverse purposes, as it does with other animals. They become obsessed with, you know, the mating ritual, let's say, and so they use their intelligence to gather blue things, to build a big blue nest, because that'll impress the female. And they do it compulsively. And somebody would call that intelligence, because like a squirrel or something, it figures out a way to get more blue stuff, or the squirrels figure out a way to break into the bird feeder. And they're using intelligence, but they're not using it intelligently. So the motivating mechanism has nothing to do with intelligence. Yes, the scheming is intelligent, but it's a limited intelligence in the sense that it's often at the expense of the other things you're living with. It's a intelligence applied to the me first, you know, what's in it for me kind of notions of success and failure. And those aren't rational definitions of success and failure. Figuring out whether you got enough of your share isn't doing rational math. It's not rational economics for being a civilized human being. It's not intelligent. It's a perversion of intelligence by psychological issues of huge bias. So we have this huge bias for ourselves because we're selfish innately, because we feel it. We feel the hunger, we feel the horny, we feel the desire, we feel the want, we feel the necessity. And then we have this, you know, all of these secondary biases that just flow out of that, which is, I'm one of these kind of people. I have blue eyes. You know, I'm tall, or I'm this, I'm that, I'm white, and all that kind of crap. And then we do this grotesquely nepotistic thing where it's even more personal, like, oh yes, it has 50% of my code in it, that's so special. And that's not intelligence, that's anti-intelligence. Bigotry is anti-intelligent. Prejudice is anti-intelligent. The intelligence is the thing saying you're being owned by your subjective experience. You are cheating the truth by thinking your mommy was the best mommy. You have to logically know that's probably not the truth. Now you can't help feeling it in some way, but it's probably not the truth. Alright, so let's do some of this comment stuff and such. So anyway, I'm going to keep trying to talk with people, and I know some of these videos might be tedious for people who wish me to be more of a sledgehammer. I just think that obviously to be effective, we're going to have to find some way to prevent people from becoming punk conservatives, you know, punk rebels, to dispose of whole subjects with trivial, oh, they just stole that money and those people are just doing that, you know, all this conspiracy theory shit and everything else. Yes, there's a ton of corruption in the world. There's a ton of you know, people doing just wrong and bad and shitty things. But you can't fix any of it by saying fuck the system, fuck fixing it. That's the opposite way to fix something, is to go fuck fixing it. No, you have to say, well, we got to fix that. We got to fix that. We got to fix that. And you know, we're so far from people doing that. The reflex just seems so scapegoat and dispose. just pretend the problem doesn't exist because it's all the Fed did it or some bullshit. And it's just bullshit. 9/11 was an inside job. Ugh, it's just so pathetic. All right, so anyway, this was kind of a funny comment just from my perspective. Somebody on this gravitational lensing crap and left a link. So I did do some physics videos. I'm doing some some summary videos essentially, and I've done some overview videos before, but I'm trying to make them, they should get better with time. So anyway, I got a couple, and so I'll leave links to those. I mean, I don't see how people can deny the mess that physics is in, but whatever. And it's just so bad. But anyway, all right, so I won't get into that subject here, but people are just so clueless. They're just such fanatics, clinging, just desperately clinging to their multiverses. Anyway, all right, so I'm not really looking for particular comments, I don't think. Yeah, so yeah, this was sort of the, she was fucking awful. Gary deserves more respect. Yeah, well, she did kind of, look, she hung in there for the 2+ hours, and, but maybe she just does that because she talks a lot, and she likes talking, and so that works. But yeah, the incessant need to keep changing the subject was really annoying. But then you get the other comments, women are just lecherous, different ways, but still as bad. I mean, these cliches that, just, they're totally useless. Don't recognize any of the, some of the fundamental differences between men and women, but the fact that both men and women can do rational thinking, both of them can admit they have prejudices and subjectively different sensibilities, and they can appreciate that if they're going to interact with each other, that they have to compromise on some of those, what's my perfect expectation, because you're not going to get perfect. Anyway, all right, so this leads to the other guy's comments. Morals and ethics are embedded in us. I just think it's just silly. First off, the word morals is stupid, but this idea that ethics are embedded in us. I don't know where you grew up, but I didn't grow up that way. I had to acquire knowledge of the ability to do harm. I didn't innately know I was capable of harming things, or that it even mattered if I did. I had to acquire the knowledge of it. That being, we don't like any bad things to happen to us. Well again, how's that ethics? And so clearly, the fact that bad feelings are bad, okay, you can hardly call a piece of knowledge of ethics. That's just silly. Unless we are broken people. Being broken would not be, being broken would be not having empathy. So again, these words are just so corrosive, I think, to the conversation. Compassion and empathy, when the only word that really matters is respect. Understanding words like deserve and fair, but this idea of you need to emotionally feel it to understand it, I think is just complete crap. And if you wait for you to emotionally feel it, I don't think that's going to happen in a lot of cases, because I think our prejudices are, they're there. You're never going to feel the same way about some colors that you feel about other colors. And I can rationally tell you, well, the colors are the same and they don't matter. Don't be a bigot. Don't be prejudiced against the poor little color. Doesn't matter. A rational argument isn't going to make you feel differently about a color. It's just not. It's like saying, don't be owned by your sexual preferences. well, how exactly do you not be owned by them? There's no somebody can tell me, oh, kissing a man is just so much fun. And I'd be like, I don't, you know, I don't know. That doesn't sound right to me. Something wrong with that. I'm never going to be able to say, oh yeah, that feels right. I don't think it's ever going to feel right. It's up to like a big beardy man or something. Yeah, I don't think so. Towards others, or in extreme cases, not even oneself. So again, this is just so bullshitty, this idea that somehow humans are innately wonderful, decent creatures. No, we're like all the other animals. And if we were back in those, if we were back being animals, we would be genocidally killing each other. That's how it works. We'd be competing over the females in a very real life and death way. It wouldn't be pretty. So, it's just irritating. This tribe, he calls himself. You live in a garbage can. Fuck off. Who could take a scumbag halfwit like you seriously? And again, and this comment is supposed to be, what kind of dimwit, you know, not even a halfwit, but a dimwit, would find this a seriously compelling argument from nobody, you know, from nobody. Amazing. Get lost. Get over it, loser. Yeah, great argument. Oh, wait a minute. No, it isn't. It's really stupid. Alright. Alright, so then there were, you know, a lot of people were pretty negative on Annika, which, you know. So that's why I talk to her, is because the truth is she's not liked, you know. She doesn't say, I don't think she does placate, you know. Well, maybe she does. I don't know. Or she just doesn't do it enough. I mean, you could make the argument that I guess if she was a little more careful about how she uses her rhetoric, she could be a hero of the righties, you know, the MGTOWs and all those kind of people. And she's not. You know, so obviously she's not saying things to, you know, solidify her place in a substantial, whatever it is, political niche, you know. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to say. All right, all 10,000 years of mass extinction from an asteroid. The sun is getting warmer, is causing global warming. Yeah, well, that was a really silly remark. I mean, the sun isn't the threat here. You know, the sun's not causing the problem. I mean, like I said, I spell it out as simply as possible. I don't know how the argument can be denied. The biosphere has been sinking carbon. It's been putting oil and coal into the ground. That's what the biosphere has been doing. And that has a consequence. The lack of availability of all that carbon means that it can't fly into the atmosphere easily because it's not on the surface of the earth anymore. It is literally sunk and frozen and locked for millions, if not hundreds of millions of years. It's out of, it's in the vault. It's out of circulation. It can't be a player. Where if it was on the surface of the earth, it would be a player, and it would be in the atmosphere, and it would be warming the atmosphere. So it's just kind of obvious that over the last 300 million years, the earth has been sinking carbon, and that we have been unsinking it. For the last 100 years, we've been aggressively unsinking carbon. Do you need any more evidence than that? I mean, realistically. Isn't that enough of a story to say, yes, I get that. That's exactly what's happening. Millions of years of putting tons of energy into the ground, locking carbon, and we're freeing it back into the biosphere again. And half the biosphere is the atmosphere. I mean, shit. Not complicated. Anyway. Alright, then these people always keep commenting on this Indonesia video. So I'll just say to these people, I mean, none of these people watch the video clearly. I mean, Indonesia killed what the hell's his name? Derived energy. They killed him for a marijuana joint that he didn't smoke, and that he knew that, you know, he was saving a woman. Okay, he's being a little white knighting and doing the, you know, in my opinion, you know, doing the right thing. And he paid a huge price for it. And, you know, they could have made the price. They could have just said, okay, pay us $10,000. They, you know, they could have turned this into a thing where they can create plenty of discouraging legislation to prevent people from smoking marijuana. But I mean, just the idea of killing a person over it, you know, in these dismal prisons for a marijuana, for a joint. I mean, it's a ridiculous country that does that kills people for stupid reasons like this. Good people, people who were educators and really lived really decent lives, and they kill him for this. I mean, it's fucking retarded. You're fanatical lunatics. Yeah. God. But they don't watch the videos. Anyway, I can almost see Inmendham's tail wagging, talking to a pretty girl. Yes, well, that does make it easier, frankly. I mean, you know, I could talk to some of these, whatever they are, you know, these Peterson-type males, but they're just so frickin' creepy, you know, that, yeah, it's a little tougher. But I suppose I could find some of them and try to have a conversation. But I figured, hey, yeah, you know, if I can talk to a chick instead, I'll do that. Yeah, it seems like makes it more fun. But yeah, I'm not, you know, we'll see what happens. I mean, I'll see if there's any future update. You know, keep working at it, and maybe find some better people to talk to. But I'm just saying the arguments need to be made. And they need to be made to people who have to actually say better things than, your hair looks stupid, do you know how retarded you are? Or, you know, whatever this bullshit is, this comment bullshit. You know, they actually have to make some kind of arguments. So that's sort of what's being solicited, is some sort of rational arguments for their insane, fanatical scapegoating. Anyway. I mean, they're picking on her voice here. I mean, just no point. You know, she's so up herself, it's unbearable. Well, no. Who isn't on YouTube? All right, so this was the comment I wanted to get to. As you can see, it's monstrously long, so I haven't even gone close to reading most of it. Because it starts off so poorly. I mean, it's just the same bullshit premises that are just, oh, fuck this. So anyway, it says, it's been a few months since I first listened to the wonderful exchange between Sam Harris and David Benatar. It was a horrible exchange, and I have many observations which I feel compelled to put into words. But first, I want to be clear that I think David is 100% right about the quality of life being overwhelmingly negative, especially if you include the animal kingdom. And that this negativity is more intense and enduring than the positivity. Well, yes, of course, the nature's killing 90% of the things it kills are immature children. Okay. However, I am still convinced that there are some inconsistencies with his philosophy. So he's 100% convinced, and yet he still has some problem with inconsistencies. I mean, it's just, what the hell is that rubbish? On his blog, Helene Unbound notes that antinatalism is built on an inverted morality. So again, this stupid immorality word. I mean, how can you, you're talking as if you're philosophically engaged, and yet you're using a word like morality, where morals are only derived in any human case in human history from dogma. You know, from edicts from gods. Morality isn't the subject of civilization or social contract or ethics. You could use lots of words here. But morality? All right. In that it takes evolutionary mechanisms. So here we go. In that it takes evolutionary mechanisms that we use to survive Compassion, empathy, and aversion to suffering. I mean, kind of amazing, that we use aversion to suffering to survive when it has nothing to do with that as the mission we have. We avoid suffering because suffering is unpleasant. We don't avoid suffering to survive. Now, the fact that nature, in some crude sense, gives us pain in ways that we get little damages and stuff, but most of the pain you're going to experience in your life isn't going to be anything you can do about. Okay, it's not going to have anything to do with you correcting some behavior. It's going to be the pain of the brain tumor shoving your eye out of your head, or pain that's completely useless to the organism in terms of you can't do anything about it, can't fix it. It's just a blight, and it doesn't produce any a sophisticated enough pain response to be conducive to your best interest. Some pain will just kill you. Okay, it won't prolong your existence. It will shorten your existence because your pain will make you ineffective. Anyway, both as individuals and as a species, more mush, it uses them as the basis to advocate for our self-imposed extinction. All right, so the idea that we would advocate for extinction is just an acknowledgement that the game we're playing is insufficient. That is, it hurts too much stuff and it produces too little good. So it's like any kind of machine. Too much friction, too much fire, too much noise, too many flying parts, too much damage for too little functional purpose. It doesn't do anything. We don't cure any problem the universe has. We don't band-aid it, we don't ointment it, we don't massage it sensually, we don't arouse the universe, we don't do anything functional besides satisfy our own imposed needs. We don't do anything extra. And therefore it makes the game even sillier to even think the game could make sense when it doesn't produce anything at all, really, that is at all necessary, except the necessity we created by playing the game. All right. But this idea that compassion, empathy, and aversion to suffering are some kind of evolutionary mechanisms, compassion and empathy, when those are exactly as I pointed out, as expressed by as we naturally express those compassion and empathy, we do it with insane bigotry and bias. It has no legitimacy as a definition of right and wrong. It's completely irrational, completely disconnected from any kind of sensibility. Just as when the Europeans came to North America and they slaughtered what were their ancestors' children. I mean, their own brothers and sisters, technically. Okay, the children of their own brothers and sisters, they killed. They couldn't recognize them. And that's what they were, though. That's how irrational it is. Both as anyway. Much of these mechanisms are meant to prevent in the first place. So the self-imposed extinction, which is what these mechanisms were meant to prevent in the first place. Clearly they weren't meant to prevent self-imposed extinction. I mean, that's a complex idea. They were just meant, okay, in the sense that you only acquire things that give you advantage. Some of those advantages work over a long period of time, some of them only work over a short period of time. The human race hasn't barely been tested as a biological organism. So we know that the ones that have been tested by evolution, like the crocodile, okay, have been here for hundreds of millions of years. Okay, that's the mechanism that is the winner. That's the one nature's trying to make, and we're just aberrants, fancy pantsy, more complex, more antennas, but not necessarily well tested at all. And again, all our intelligence was for was a little bit of scheming, you know, in terms of its natural purpose. So there was nothing, nature wasn't saying, I'm going to give them language and then make them intelligent. These are just accidental byproducts of the process. So again, if we just apply our intelligence to satisfying our needs, then we're just scheming. And then the intelligence isn't really intelligence, is it? If all it's doing, if it's not identifying problems, and it's just being used to solve the ones imposed by the programming, you'd hardly call that intelligence. Alright, Maverick Philosopher has attempted to solve this dilemma on his blog with some success. I doubt it. Creep. Anyway, I agree with Harris that it is a blatant double standard. So this is a guy who believes Benatar 100%, right? Sure, fuck you. A blatant double standard? Fuck you. Benatar to apply an experimental mode of argumentation. I don't even know what that means. For one scenario, people who aren't born aren't deprived of pleasure. Yes, exactly. If you don't have a need, then the need doesn't exist to be satisfied, so you can't have an unsatisfied need left over. It's impossible. Oh, well, it's too fucking complicated for you. And an abstract, non-experimental mode for other scenario. Absence of suffering is good, even if nobody to appreciate. Well, obviously you can't appreciate prevention because it prevents the thing from happening. So you can't say like, oh, I got run over by the train, but then we ran the filament backwards and I got unrun over. So I know what it was like to get run over, but I didn't get run over. So now I can appreciate that I didn't get run over, even though the only way I know that is because you ran me over first and I have knowledge of being run over. Of course you can't appreciate it if you're benefiting from the fact that you aren't appreciating the suffering. So of course the not having the suffering is still a good. If you can't understand prevention is a good thing, I mean, God, that is so fucking stupid. I mean, to sit there and say prevention doesn't mean anything, it can't have any positive good value, because nobody's going to be able to say, oh, I'm enjoying the prevented harm. I'm enjoying not, I mean, it's like me saying, yes, I'm enjoying not having cancer right now. So if somebody had prevented me from having cancer, and so now I don't have cancer, clearly I can enjoy it. But more clearly, if all there was on Mars was war, and all you did was die and suffer in war, clearly ending the suffering would be a good thing. It would be idiotic to say, keep torturing them so they can understand they're being tortured, and then they'll be able to appreciate it if I mitigate some of their torture, and they can appreciate not being tortured. They can appreciate not being tortured twice as much. So let's say if I took away half their torture, but I still gave them half torture, then you'd say, oh, well, that's good prevention because they're still conscious, and now they can still say, oh, that's really great, you got rid of half my torture, and I can appreciate, oh, I have half torture, right? But if I got rid of all the torture, you'd say that has no value because now there's nobody here to go, oh, I'm not being tortured. I mean, it's just stupid. Anyway, I'll read the rest of this some other time, but false premises and I mean, clearly, you know, to call it a blatant double standard, which is the fundamental principle of the asymmetry, a double standard, and then to say you agree with Benatar 100% is just insane, frankly. And it can only be for some other purpose that you're doing that. Because it's that stupid. I mean, I can't understand what you're thinking. I mean, the whole point of antinatalism is to prevent the harm from happening. And to say that prevention, you can't see the value in it, I just don't know how somebody can be that fucking insanely stupid. Alright, anyway. It's probably enough. I think I've said all I need to say, right? Got the Molyneux thing. Oh yeah, I should be making some better quality videos on the physics channel. We'll see how that goes. So I got a computer upgrade. Um, and first impression is, yes, it's the sound. It was my sound card that was probably the issue. The old one, partly. I'm back on the old. I'm using the mic on the webcam here, and it seems to be okay-ish as long as I obey certain rules. But yeah, I'd like to get the quality up a little bit. But anyway, so what else? So yeah, and I did the physics videos, and then there was the. So yeah, I'm still looking for people to have discussions with, interviews, whatever you want to call it, probings, probings, regarding how they have arrived in on this planet, endured experiences, seen what happens here, and are still, in some sense, optimistic for the welfare of the average consciousness on this planet, and think it's really okay. How do you do that? Yeah, so that's probably enough. I mean, the game has to be viewed as the whole game. You can't just say because there's one diamond, in a big giant pile of pus and manure and, that somehow the pile is fantastic. It's just silly. Stupid. Insufficient reasoning. So look at all this crap. This amazing big pile of crap. Let's see. Of course, the last thing I want is to sound like a post-modernist myself. Well, I think you sound like a loop-de-doo, whatever, singularity hunter. But I think that in order for society to function, reality requires some taming. Nature is a wild beast. Nature is ignorant, is what nature is. And we must bring her to yield, whatever that means, and bundle her with a rationality that is utterly alien to her. Yeah, again, so you're going to keep defending the game when the nature of the game is dissatisfaction, is the motivator. It starts with a negative. The first move on the board is a negative move. You're not born satisfied. You're born struggling to gain satisfaction. We are a product of nature. Who cares? And yet the human mind and the universe, oh please, are irrevocably incongruent with each other. How does that even make sense? The human mind and the universe. How so? How does the universe say? How is the universe obnoxious to intelligence? You're just arguing that it's inconvenient. Yeah, that's all. Much misery has been and will continue to be born of this, an inevitable result of sentient and the void existing simultaneously. The void. Yeah. Yes. Life will, is tied to death, and even if you separate those two things, again, the game is made out of competition, and without it, there's no game. The game is a delusion. A game is made out of addiction. It's not made out of any kind of reasoning. Anyway, let's see. Bitcoin will decrease in value because of time and progress. You know, it'll decrease in value because people figure out it's worthless. It's, you know, fake ice cream. Yeah. Go to the store, buy some fake ice cream. I don't think so. Tesla nonsense. AC wireless? Tesla didn't invent AC wireless. Tesla attempted to transmit usable amperages of electricity through the atmosphere. He didn't invent AC wireless. Shit. But again, more truther delusional bullshit everywhere you turn. Alright, anyway, enough of this. So, till next time and such. Hopefully this is adequate quality until I up the game a little bit more. You know, I want to do some more interesting things, but that'll have to wait until I get around to it and such. Oh yeah, there was the snowstorm. I could do that. Have a little video. Is this a video? Nope, that's not the video. This video there? Yeah, that's a video. How do I play the video? I don't know. Hit the play button, I think. Alright, no volume. So I basically went out the door and said, holy shit. Fucked. It was really spooky. Because I should pause it here and there. You know, I'll get a good view of, wait for a better view, oh, there's a good view. I mean, the trees were just full of tons and tons of snow, and there was no wind when the snow was slowing down, but it was starting to, a little tiny breeze was picking up, and you could hear everywhere, you could just hear tree limbs cracking, you know, and then you'd hear a tree fall here and there, and it was just like, you know, there's trees all around the house, and I was just like, oh man, I'm so fucked. You know, because I didn't even know what end of the house to sit in or to just stand in. Because you're just like, you know, what end's more likely to get hit? It's a giant tree right next to my front door. There's a giant tree right in my backyard. So, yeah, it was really quite unpleasant in terms of a nasty scenario, just waiting to, you know, I mean, it's just a lot. That was, you know, it doesn't, there was like 10 inches of snow on these branches. It was a lot of snow. I mean, I never saw that much snow stick to bare tree limbs. I mean, not a leaf on any of these trees, and it were just, I mean, it knocked over all the pine trees. I mean, the cedar trees, the blue spruce, you know, that I planted 20 years ago, and it wiped that out. This is like all the ivy and shit that's growing in by my front door. So I guess that was it. Maybe I'll look out the window or something. So anyway, I didn't have power. It was quite unpleasant. So that was the first storm, and then you know, after a week we had power for one day, and then the next storm showed up, and that knocked out power for another 3 days. It was just, it was unpleasant. But it could have been worse. So there was a big tree that fell sideways, you know, so it missed the house, so that was good. But I got an awful lot to clean up. All my deer fencing is down. Everything's a mess, and it's wet everywhere. You can't even walk. It's just a lousy month. So I was kind of, you know, kind of optimistic. February was kind of mild. I'm saying maybe we're going to squeak out of this winter. But I just knew there wasn't enough snow. You know, it was only like 5 inches of snow for the winter or something. So I just knew, you can't have that. No, it's going to be more. And yeah, a lot more. Anyway. So, till next time and such and so forth and whatnot. Till next time.